Ambassador Gordon Sondland said, quote, "No one told me directly that the aid to Ukraine was tied to anything. I was presuming it was." Hello, this is Robert Robano, Vice President of Public Policy with Americans for Limited Government, dailytorch.com. Hit that subscribe button. Today we're going to be talking about U.S. Ambassador to the European Union Gordon Sondland's November 20th testimony to the House Intelligence Committee in the Democrats' quest to impeach President Trump that I believe is doomed to failure. And this would be one of the very good reasons. He actually, he's the one who conveyed to the Ukrainians that he thought that military assistance was being tied to an announcement of investigations by Ukraine into Ukrainian origins of the Russiagate investigation, potential origins, and to corruption by Burisma Holdings, a natural gas firm that it so happens that the former vice president's son, Hunter Biden, actually served on the board of directors of, at the very time when Joe Biden was apparently getting the prosecutor general of Ukraine fired, who says he was investigating Burisma Holdings. And so the idea is that, Trump's trying to leverage military assistance to Ukraine in exchange for gathering dirt on Joe Biden and the Obama administration. But I don't think that's actually what was going on here, because you actually have legitimate investigations into corruption in Ukraine. It's kind of been a cornerstone of U.S. policy to Ukraine, is that, they should be investigating corruption. And you've had State Department officials who are saying, you should fire this prosecutor or that prosecutor. You've had a former vice president do it. All of this under the Obama administration. And sometimes during the Trump administration. Most recently, you had Marie Yovanovitch, the former U.S. ambassador to Ukraine, who was saying that Nazar Kolodnitsky, an anti-corruption prosecutor in Ukraine, should be removed. That was just in March, and shortly before she was removed from her post by President Trump, I would note. But here's Gordon Sondland, and he's saying that military assistance was never tied to any announcement of investigations. Quote, "No one told me directly that the aid was tied to anything. I was presuming it was." And this is his testimony on November 20th, and it destroys the concept that the $250 million of U.S. military assistance, which, by the way, was released on September 11, was ever being leveraged by President Trump in exchange for investigations. Sondland had previously, now if you look at his prior testimony, which he had updated on November 4th, that he presumed that military assistance was likely being conditioned by the administration when he spoke to Ukrainian presidential aid on September 1st, but that he, quote, "did not know when, why, or by whom the aid was suspended." So we've already known that Sondland is not an eyewitness to the White House or anybody in the State Department or the National Security Council ordering him to leverage military assistance to Ukraine in exchange for investigations. Instead, here's what happened according to his prior testimony. Quote, "I now do recall a conversation on September 1, 2019 in Warsaw with Zelensky presidential aide Andriy Yermak. This brief pull-aside conversation followed the larger meeting involving Vice President Mike Pence and President Volodymyr Zelensky, in which President Zelensky had raised the issue of the suspension of U.S. aid to Ukraine directly with Vice President Pence. After that large meeting, I now recall speaking individually with Mr. Yermak, where I said that resumption of U.S. aid will likely not occur until Ukraine provided the public anti-corruption statement we've been discussing for many weeks." But he says he was speculating, quote, "I always believed that suspending aid to Ukraine was ill-advised, although I did not know and still do not know when, why, or by whom the aid was suspended. However, by the beginning of September 2019, and in the absence of any credible explanation for the suspension of aid, I presumed that the aid suspension had become linked to the proposed anti-corruption statement." But instead, it wasn't a military assistance that was being asked for in exchange for, you want a meeting with President Trump? Well, we need to know that you're going to be doing stuff on anti-corruption and that you're going to be assisting Attorney General William Barr in his ongoing investigation into the origins of the Russiagate fiasco, where President Trump and his campaign were falsely accused of being Russian agents. This was accusations that were paid for by the DNC and the Hillary Clinton campaign. And they hired Fusion GPS and former British spy Christopher Steele to suggest to intelligence agencies and the FBI that President Trump and his agents were bought and paid for Russian agents, that Carter Page, Paul Manafort, they were participating in the hack of the DNC and turning emails over to WikiLeaks, that this was done with, quote, "the full knowledge and support of the Trump and senior members of his campaign." And that was the basis for the FBI then going to the Justice Department and getting a FISA warrant, Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Act, surveillance by the Obama administration against the Trump campaign, the opposition party, in an election year. And this is absolutely inappropriate, especially since it was false allegations. So, of course, Attorney General Barr wants to get to the bottom of who passed on that information. Christopher Steele says he has sources in the Kremlin, senior Kremlin officials, foreign ministry officials, but there's some suggestion that some of his sources may have actually been go-betweens in Ukraine. And I think he wants to get to the bottom of the sourcing on the Steele dossier, because that's kind of where the root of the evil on these allegations. And then you had a 3-year investigation by the Justice Department, 2 of which were headed by Special Counsel Robert Mueller, who ultimately found in his report that there was no conspiracy between Trump, his campaign, and Russia, not Paul Manafort, not Mike Flynn, not Michael Cohen, not Carter Page, not George Papadopoulos, and certainly not Roger Stone. Nobody was charged with conspiring with Russia on the DNC hack, the John Podesta hack, and putting emails onto WikiLeaks. There were a lot of process crimes there. Oh, you didn't tell the full truth to the investigators on this or that question, but nothing arising to the level of a conspiracy. And Mueller explicitly found no evidence of a conspiracy between Trump, his campaign, and Russia. And so the whole thing was made up by somebody. And I think that's what Attorney General Barr wants to get to the bottom of. And we should be talking to the Ukrainians. They may have had something to do with it. There was coordination with the Justice Department and foreign intelligence agencies. And that's what we need to get to the bottom of. I think that this is a legitimate investigation. And we've seen statements from the Justice Department most recently from Kerry Kupek, that a team led by U.S. Attorney John Durham is separately exploring the extent to which a number of countries, including Ukraine, played a role in the counterintelligence investigation. And that statement, she's, I think, very clear here. Our Department of Justice team, led by U.S. Attorney John Durham, is separately seeking the extent to which a number of countries, including Ukraine, played a role in the counterintelligence investigation directed at the Trump campaign during the 2016 election. While the Attorney General has yet to contact Ukraine in connection with this investigation, certain Ukrainians who are not members of the government have volunteered information to Mr. Durham, which he is evaluating. So I think this is a legitimate investigation by Attorney General Barr. We should get to the bottom of that. And then as for corruption in Ukraine, that's rampant. And Burisma Holdings is one of the biggest companies. And they've been accused of corruption. There's been many investigations, and Joe Biden himself had one of the prosecutors fired who said he was investigating that. And I think that's what Trump is bringing to Zelensky's attention in his July 25 phone call with Zelensky. And, you know, Joe Biden had this prosecutor fired. Maybe you should look at Burisma again, because I don't know if that investigation was fully covered there. So you had some discussion of a meeting between Zelensky and Trump, and you need to do something on these investigations. Quote, per Sondland's testimony, quote, scheduling a White House visit for President Zelensky was conditioned upon President Zelensky's agreement to make a public anti-corruption statement. This condition had been communicated by Rudy Giuliani, with whom President Trump directed Ambassador Volker, Secretary Perry, and me on May 23, 2019, to discuss issues related to the president's concerns about Ukraine. But those conditions were dropped for a meeting because they ended up having a meeting on September 1. Trump was supposed to go to Warsaw at the last minute. He sends Pence instead because there's a hurricane hitting the United States. According to Ambassador Volker, U.S. Special Representative for Ukraine negotiations, Kurt Volker, on October 3, he said, quote, to my knowledge, again, this is Kurt Volker's testimony before the House Intelligence Committee. To my knowledge, the news about a hold on security assistance did not get into Ukrainian government circles, as indicated to me by the current foreign minister, then diplomatic advisor, until the end of August. And by the time we had that, we had dropped the idea of even looking at a statement in exchange for a meeting. Further, Volker was asked about the conditioning of the meeting. Did the president ever withhold a meeting with President Zelensky until the Ukrainians committed to investigate the allegations concerning the 2016 election? To which Volker replied, the answer to the question is no, there was no linkage. And that's because the September 1 meeting in Warsaw had already been scheduled By the time the Ukrainians found out about the military assistance, they were having a meeting. So there was no leveraging of a meeting in exchange for investigations. But we'll get to the substance of the phone call in just a second there. Sondland, he was at the meeting that was supposed to have been leveraged in Warsaw on September 1, even though no public statement had been issued by Ukraine. And when he conveyed to Ukraine that his presumption that now military aid was being conditioned on such investigations, that even though per his testimony, he, quote, never received a clear answer as to why the military aid was suspended. And even though Zelensky, which Sondland should have been well aware of, had already agreed to the investigations on the July 25 phone call. And we'll quote that because Zelensky spoke to Trump directly, and he gave Trump assurances on cooperating with Attorney General Barr on the origins of the Russiagate hoax. And he also said, yeah, we've been working on Burisma Holdings corruption. We're going to get to the bottom of corruption. I ran on corruption, getting to the bottom of corruption and cleaning up the corruption. Zelensky was overwhelmingly elected in Ukraine with 73% of the vote. He trounced Pedro Poroshenko, who was the U.S.-backed candidate, I think. And so on assisting the U.S. Justice Department's investigations into the origins of the Russiagate hoax, Zelensky said, quote, yes, it is very important for me and everything that you just mentioned earlier. I also plan to surround myself with great people. In addition to that investigation, I guarantee as the president of Ukraine that all the investigations will be done openly and candidly. That I can assure you. On Burisma, without any pressure from Trump, and no conditioning of military assistance or any meetings, by then they were already talking about when we're going to have the meeting, quote, I understand and I'm knowledgeable about the situation, speaking on Burisma. Since we have won the absolute majority in our parliament, the next prosecutor general will be 100% my person, my candidate, who will be approved by the parliament and will start as new prosecutor in September. He or she will look into the situation, specifically to the company that you mentioned in the issue. The issue of the investigation of the case is actually the issue of making sure to restore honesty, so we will take care of that and work on the investigation of the case. Now, Sondland had apparently arranged for Zelensky to tell Trump this when he was arranging the phone call, because he spoke to Zelensky prior to then. In his testimony now, that's just been released, he just went out there yesterday, he said he had already conveyed to Washington, D.C. prior to the July 25 phone call that Zelensky had agreed to, quote, run a fully transparent investigation. And in Zelensky's words, this is Sondland quoting Zelensky in an email, quote, to turn over every stone. Without any meeting, and more than a month before the September 1 meeting, Sondland had received word that Ukraine was already on top of the investigations, and now we have reports from Reuters, sure enough, that the Burisma probe has been expanded and has been ongoing for almost 2 years, predating, therefore, Zelensky's April 2019 election. So, I mean, that seems to be the end of any idea of a quid pro quo. If they've been investigating the Burisma Holdings, and just regardless of the fact of Hunter Biden working there or not, that means that there couldn't have been a quid pro quo with Zelensky because the military assistance hadn't yet been withdrawn back in 2018. We were giving them military assistance. And this probe is now being widened by the new prosecutor general, just like Zelensky said they would. Quote, this is from Reuters, Ukraine has widened its investigation into the founder of energy company Burisma to include suspicion of embezzling state funds, Prosecutor General Ruslan Ryabowshapka said on Wednesday. Allegations of wrongdoing at Burisma go to the heart of the U.S. impeachment inquiry into whether President Trump improperly pressured Ukraine's leadership to investigate his main rival in the 2020 presidential race. So here's what Ryabowshapka says, that Zlovkesky is now suspected of, quote, the theft of government funds on an especially large scale, but did not disclose the details. The document, which is only partially visual, show Kulik suspected Zlovkesky of offenses, including use of official position to embezzle $800 million hryvnias, that's $300 million of money belonging to the central bank. The investigation is effectively on hold, though, because the Ukrainian authorities cannot determine Zlovkesky's whereabouts. So, I don't know, maybe he's running away. Giuliani has previously met with Kulik in Paris. And this was information, I believe, that the Ukrainians were trying to pass along to the United States. There's some accusations that Joe Biden had tried to get the prosecutor general fired to stop him from investigating Burisma. And we know that accusation because prosecutor general who was fired basically said so, and that's what Trump was relaying to the president of Ukraine. Why wouldn't he bring that to his attention? The U.S. could have a hand in the corruption in Ukraine. So Trump's saying, you know what, we're going to improve our relationship with you. And here's some information that might be helpful to you. You should be looking at Burisma. Now, the investigation into Burisma had been reopened in 2018 per April 1 reporting from The Hill's John Solomon. Kolodnitsky, quote, the lead anti-corruption prosecutor in Lutsenko's office, confirmed to me in an interview that part of the Burisma investigation was reopened in 2018 after Joe Biden made remarks bragging about getting the prosecutor general fired. Kolodnitsky said, we were able to start the case again, but we don't see any result from this case 1 year after the opening because of some external influence, citing problems with a separate Ukrainian agency he said was dragging its feet in gathering evidence. Now, Shokin told The Hill's John Solomon prior to the election of Zelensky that he was removed in 2016 because of his investigation of Burisma, which Hunter Biden served on the board of directors of. In other words, the investigation into Burisma has been ongoing for years, at least as far back as 2016. With Shokin, they had just been seizing property. They were raiding the house of Zlovkesky weeks before Shokin was being fired. The U.S. State Department had been urging the prosecutor general to look at Burisma, and then suddenly there was an about face on U.S. policy. Now suddenly the U.S. wanted the prosecutor general looking at Burisma fired. And as for Russiagate, so the investigation in Ukraine on Burisma, that's Ukraine's problem. They've been investigating that for years. If there was embezzlement of funds, and Lutsenko has said that there could have been a violation of U.S. laws as well, and they were trying to turn that over to the United States Justice Department. Now, as for Russiagate, the Justice Department has already confirmed an active investigation into the origins there, as we've previously covered with Kerry Kupek's statement that they're evaluating information from Ukraine. That's perfectly legitimate. So you have a mutual legal assistance treaty between the United States and Ukraine. We have these treaties with lots of countries signed in 1998. And now these investigations have been confirmed in both countries. And I'll leave you with the close here, meaning President Trump's call to Ukrainian President Zelensky was perfectly legitimate because the investigations are and always have been legitimate. As Americans for Limited Government President Rick Manning noted in a statement on November 20, unless President Trump has a time machine, he did not initiate the probe because they had started before Zelensky was even elected. That's the commentary. This is Robert Romano, Vice President of Public Policy with Americans for Limited Government, dailytorch.com. Hit the subscribe button, ring the bell for notifications, and have a good day.